Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much, Jodi, for a fascinating talk. And I have to say, I come at this from the point of view of somebody who has been convinced by Jodi's argument, and I'm sure a lot of you might have been convinced. And if you're not convinced, well, all I need to do is basically show you the Economist cover of yesterday, which showed the genealogy of protesters starting from the Paris Commune of 1848 and finishing now today with a protester holding a mobile phone. And to me, this shows the emptying out of any possibility for protest. The fact that I'm not going to call them reactionary, but at least mainstream media appropriate people's protest and congratulate them on protesting without really engaging with any of their demands in any way shows precisely this kind of emptying out of all substance from this kind of political action. And when things really come to a head, when people go out and protest and they start occupying public spaces, then the media start protesting about the protesters, saying they shouldn't be doing this, they should stay at home, and retweet a couple of tweets, and that would be the basis for political action, and then we can congratulate them on protesting. So from this point of view, I am convinced by Jodi's analysis and Jodi's arguments that really communicative capitalism is co-opting all these democratic energies and all these protests against what people are experiencing, and what we are experiencing is in fact brutal exploitation at all levels. And I speak about this as also a Greek citizen who has been at the receiving end of very, very brutal austerity policies. So I will not deal with Jodi's analysis in any more detail. I just want to see what happens from now onwards. And the first question I want to pose to Jodi is, should we think of these kinds of like network communicative structures as hegemonic or totalitarian? Because if they are hegemonic, then that means that they allow for some space for the creation of something alternative, for some contestation, the creation of an outside. If, on the other hand, they are totalitarian, then we must rethink our strategies very, very radically. So this is my first question. Secondly, and following up to this, the question is how can we even recuperate communication from communicative capitalism? And the question then that follows is communication necessary? And I think it is, because if we think of politics as involving decisions, in the sense of Derrida's idea of decision as a moment, a radical choice, a moment of a radical choice, then I think that we need this kind of communication preceding this kind of radical choice. But if communication is already co-opted, then how do we recuperate it? So I think I'll just leave it at that, and perhaps I can follow up on some other points that will be raised. Yeah.
Just to interject, I mean, Eugenia's from Greece, and we're in Ireland here, and we're all under the cosh with regards to sort of lots of issues. So, Jodi, do you want to respond to the question? Or yeah, okay. Kevin Rafter is another colleague of mine in the School of Communication. So Kevin will make a few.
Thank you for a very provocative contribution this morning. And I know you've had a long journey to get here, so your presence is welcomed. I think that the point you made in terms of recent activism and how you deal with that in terms of your argument and your concept is central. And I think it's probably, we're in the early foothills in terms of the impact of social media in terms of democracy and political activism and engagement, and how it is unfolding out before us. We're living through it. So I suppose in some ways we're reaching early tentative judgments and assessments. But the one point I would maybe raise is the role of information, which I think is central to the discussion and to your argument. If you look at the WikiLeaks experience and Julian Assange, who is not maybe the most popular person to be quoting, but in terms of what WikiLeaks was about, it was that information does good. And their goal wasn't just about having people reading documents, it was about achieving political change, political reform through the release of information. And if you look at the case of Edward Snowden, it's about information. And what this technological change does is it puts more information into the public domain, and it puts more information into the hands of us as citizens. We know more than any previous generation about how our countries are governed and how our governments operate, and we will know more as this communications age advances. That presents tremendous opportunities in terms of democratic engagement. So I think in terms of your argument, I would subscribe to a lot of it, but I think it's about more than just the activism. Social media, Twitter, Facebook doesn't bring about revolution. It's the access to the information that these communication platforms give us, which is so important. And I think we can't underestimate the impact of the access to documentation and to information which previously was locked away from us as citizens. And we have the big scale examples of things that have happened in the last number of years. But just drawing on one of the sessions I was at yesterday, there was and I can't recall the lady that actually gave the paper from City University in London, and it was about the role of foreign correspondents. But she had a tremendous example, which is very small scale but very pertinent to our discussion here, which was from Kenya, and where people locally objected to particular coverage of an uprising and disturbances in Kenya, and they objected to the coverage on CNN. And locals took to Twitter and they pressurized the local correspondent. In many ways, they embarrassed CNN and the local correspondent into actually retracting and issuing an apology. Now, 10 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. 15 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. So the fact that we have access to information and we have the tools to use that information, I think that is the real, for me, that is the important aspects in terms of the ability for democratic change. So I think the whole question of the recent activism, I think actually is central to your argument, and maybe it's the information that is key. It's not so much the activism itself. Maybe leave it up to the floor to other people who have contributions as well.
Jodi, if you want to sort of respond to that.
Yeah, can you hear? Is this all right? Can you hear everyone here? Okay. Okay. So on the information, this is why I have the argument regarding the decline of symbolic efficiency. The release of information does nothing. Think about torture in the U.S. The fact that we've known about torture since, was it 2004, 2005? Everyone knows. Everyone in the world knows that the U.S. knows that it has tortured people in Abu Ghraib. The photos have been widely circulated. They were even circulated before an election. Nothing, right? The information is there. The problem of politics under these conditions of extreme capitalism and governments bent on control and austerity is not that the people don't have information. It's that the people have not been able to coalesce into exercising collective will. We don't lack for information. We have tons of information. In fact, the information feeds this cycle of commentary and then looking for more and then evaluating it and then questioning the procedures by which the information was retrieved. The problem is cultivating political will. So I actually don't, I mean, yes, the pushing a retraction from a media provider, from some sort of journal, a newspaper to change a story, well, terrific. Right? Okay, that's not a huge political change. What has happened as we have made information the sine qua non of our politics is that becomes politics rather than, let's say, the fundamental inequalities, rather than torture and violence, rather than austerity, rather than police, the police repression. So I think that the information, I actually think that what WikiLeaks does is produce a great deal of commentary on Assange.
interesting. Can you respond to the hegemonic versus
Oh,
totalitarian?
yeah. Oh, that was the hard question. So, okay, I love that question because it's so hard and I feel very stumped. And I'd like to say that if I hadn't just arrived on a plane by 9 o'clock this morning, I would have a great answer. So that's my my excuse. But actually, more seriously, I don't think of. I mean, I recognize that the idea of hegemony means that there are alternatives within. But I wouldn't call that I wouldn't say that there's an outside, and I wouldn't say that the difference between a hegemonic approach and like a diagnosis of media as hegemonic and media as totalitarian would hinge on the presence of an outside. The way I see it is that under contemporary conditions of communicative capitalism, we've got global subsumption, the real subsumption of everything under capitalism or within capitalism. But this subsumption is not flat, it's uneven, there's holes and gaps in it, there's sites of retraction, sites of intensity, sites of diminishment. And so I think that part of the political, just said very kind of abstractly, that the political initiative has to come around not being outside, but identifying gaps and holes within and occupying those gaps, pushing open those gaps, holding open those gaps. And so, and the thing that makes me kind of go back and forth between the terms hegemonic or totalitarian is, in terms of the Hannah Arendt notion of totalitarianism, well, I think that's just a kind of, step into Cold Warism and a way to diminish the contribution of socialism and communism to the 20th century by blocking it together with fascism. And so I think that version of totalitarianism is not really helpful, and that totalitarian isn't really a kind of good technical term, right? It's too kind of embedded in this Cold War ideology. But the thing that makes me not reject it completely in the question is the idea that there is something all-encompassing, which I would accept, right? Does that?
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to use the Greek term, but then I decided against it. But the Greek term for this would be tyrannical. So you have hegemony versus tyranny, and perhaps tyranny shows this because it's the kind of like illegitimate infiltration of all spheres of life. So. Yeah, I guess in English you would refer to it as totalitarianism, but I take your point about the historical association of it. But for me, and the reason I mobilize this is that for so long we understand the political system as a hegemony, and by doing so, I think we give it legitimacy. So we say, okay, it's not so bad. It is hegemonic. We can deal with this. But if we realize that in fact it is tyrannical, then perhaps political strategies then would have to be radicalized. So then we will see that retweeting is not enough, and perhaps a more active kind of revolution might be necessary. This is why I pose this question, basically. It's a matter of political strategy.
Yeah, I find that's helpful. And to that extent, I think I share the intuition. I think what I worry about a little bit is I would want to keep a focus on class antagonism. And I think that ideas of despotism and tyranny can end up seeming like a kind of state over the people rather than the rule of a capitalist class and the entrenchment of the capitalist system against the working people. And so I would rather have the element of dictatorship of capital. I would go there.
Okay, we're going to open up to the floor now, and there's 2 microphones on either end of the stadium. So we'll start with our first question from Paschal.
Good morning. Yeah, Paschal, Preston, Dublin City University. Firstly, I must thank our speaker, Jodi Dean. I must admit that I'm very impressed that you're to deliver such an energized and stimulating talk after 18 hours or 17 hours in the airports and just arriving after much delays less than just about an hour ago. So thank you very much for coming along, and indeed thank you very much for a very stimulating presentation this morning. My question, I suppose, is tapping a little bit into your emphasis on reflexivity, and in particular in terms of the role of intellectuals, because I think those of us gathered in this room might consider ourselves part of the, the current intellectual class, which, unlike other earlier periods of capitalist crises like the 1930s, we now have a very much more expanded intellectual class, a class of, if you like, knowledge producers, both in the media, but particularly in relation to academe. And I think if one looks back to the 1930s in the West, at least, there was a very, very strong critical intellectual movement in the 1930s during the last Great Depression. And I think that I would be very interested to hear your reflections on how you consider the role of intellectuals and academics like communication theorists, especially given your own work on the increasing importance of understanding the dynamics of contemporary society in terms of communication, and in particular, any thoughts or reflections you have on, what this implies for engaged forms of intellectualism, particularly in the media and communication studies field.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it, and also thanks for all of your work in inviting me. I appreciate it. So first, the big thing that's missing from what was present in the 1930s was the Communist Party, right? In the 30s, there was a center for the left, the Western left, and you can call that center a moral center. If you don't want to call it a moral center, you could at least call it a political center that all intellectuals had some kind of relation to, whether or not it was antagonistic and critical, or fellow travelers, or actual party members. Our conditions are radically different in that our intellectual class is primarily a class of people who are apologists for capitalism, and at best think that we can have capitalism with a human face, and that with emphases on more multicultural, more professionalism, more fairness, more inclusion, that this capitalism that we have can be better. And I think that at least the last 5 or 6 years of economic crisis and increased austerity have made the bankruptcy, not just of the states, but of that intellectual position all the clearer. And this then is an opportunity, I think, for a great deal of more reflection on the part of critical intellectuals, particularly in communication and media. Are we those who train new people to work in media apparatuses? Are we those who try to get funding from media corporations for our schools and departments? Are we those who raise new entrepreneurs? Or are we those who try to engender a critical political alternative to communicative capitalism?
Okay, can you give your next question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you also for this very interesting and stimulating presentation, and for the interesting questions also put by the respondents, the discussants. I would like to put my question like this. What is to be done now? Either we are capitalists, either we are for a more humane capitalism, or a social democracy if you prefer, or we are communists, radicals, anti-democrats of this so-called democracy. What is to be done now? That is the key question. And in responding to Eugenia's comment and question, I would like to say that the present cyber so-called democracy is both totalitarian and hegemonic. What can we do to change things? Please allow me to say that in 2002 in Barcelona, I presented a paper and I published following a paper called 6 Proofs on the incompatibility between the internet and democracy. And I would like to say that the problem we have, and please respond to this as a challenging question or comment, the problem of the internet is both totalitarian and hegemonic because it congregates publics. It decongregates publics. It creates a Babylon of speakers who are not having any time of attention, and time, the most crucial capital we have, capital available to us even as precariat, time and attention. There is no time for us to dialogue and to be a community that will create a response to common problems that are pressing problems, vital problems. So what is to be done? Perhaps we have to rethink about the traditional media, about horizontalizing, for example, the mass medium of television which congregates publics, and take the best of the traditional mass media and the best of individualized, segmentalizing internet use media, and create new publics. And of course, the internet per se is not revolutionary, because if it were, then the Zapatistas would have been free by now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jodi.
I think that the answer to the what is to be done now question needs to be, I think that the answer can't be a media answer. I don't think it's the problem of creating new or better media or using media differently. I actually think it's the old school problem of political organization. And I think that this is it's a problem now because of, I mean, it's a different kind of problem now than it was, say, in the 50s and 60s. It's actually a problem more like it was in Russia at the end of the 19th century, when the society was sort of fragmented and scattered, and the problem of workers and peasants was that they were, they had common problems, but they faced them alone, right? They were too individualized. And I think that's our problem. We have common problems, but we face them alone. And our culture of screens and cell phones and personalized media increases our likelihood of facing them alone, so that even if we think that we're sharing in something, we're still doing it alone. So I think that the answer has got to be forming, essentially going back to the Communist Party, or having a new Communist Party, or combining in some kind of stronger political front that makes us pose questions of political will and political alternatives, not just, well, what kind of media application is better, or what kind of accommodation is better, what kind of accommodation is better, how can we have a better discussion? That's not the problem. The problem is one of political will, and the only way to address the problem of political will is through tighter political organization.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Natalie Kozel from the University of Texas, from Texas A&M University. Thank you very much for this great lecture. My question is about the practical implications of your ideas to social movements, and I'd like you to comment on one idea that the philosopher Stephen Best has, who's also very much involved in activism. He has been writing about the failure of the animal rights movement to make connections with other movements and to have a broad basis for support of the ideas of that movement, despite the proliferation of information that links factory farming and the consumption of meat to things such as the imminent now global warming crisis. And he has argued that the inability of the animal rights movement to make connections to other movements, social movements such as the feminist movement or the gay movement or workers' movements, face-to-face connections, to build bridges, to build positive energy, and to sort of have a common goal is one reason why we don't see success, despite this proliferation of information, despite so many volunteers who want to go out and take to the streets and share the information. And I thought your ideas can bring us a lot of, I guess, insights into that.
I wish. I think that that's a great question. And I think that to me, the answer is in the term you used of factory farming, right? That would be, in my mind, the linchpin of how to connect animal rights movements with a broader, basically a broader left, which is to recognize the damning ecological repercussions of factory farming, and also the damning work conditions that are in factory farms. Right? There's a terrific book called I think it's called Breaks in the Chain. Breaks in the Chain. It's by Paul Apostolidis, and it's an analysis of a poultry factory in northern Oregon or southern Washington state, and the conditions of immigrant workers and undocumented workers in this workplace. And what you get a great picture of is the horrific conditions of the animals, the horrific conditions facing the workers, and the way that migration and legality status, gender, class, ethnicity, and a particular relation to food and to food supply all coalesce at this site. So it becomes a great nodal point for organizing, I would say for organizing workers primarily, and this would help. I think that kind of angle could be useful for animal rights.
And do you think in general that this is a way to sort of counter the hegemonic culture of communicative capitalism?
I think that any kind of effort to build a collective that's anti-capitalist pushes back against communicative capitalism. But I think the key to it is that it's not one that's primarily based on having, let's have a website where everybody sort of writes about their experiences and how they don't like meat or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's got to be the actual organization out in the street and the development of real solidarities and alliances from the workplace and broader, rather than one that's thought primarily in terms of a media strategy.
Okay, next question.
My name is Sun Ha Hong from the Annenberg School at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you for the lecture. My question follows from the previous two, but I'd like to ask really specifically, what would be the counterintuitive injunction that must be the rallying call if we accept your conclusions? And what I mean by that is, I think if we understand what you have said today as saying social media does not necessarily bring democracy, if I simplify it extremely, and that capitalism in our current form does not necessarily support democracy, then that would be correct. But these would be negative statements that cannot in themselves be a rallying call that provides a vision for the future. And I think there is a difficulty when it is easier for us to talk about what has already failed than it is to talk about what should come forth productively. And I guess the questions that came to me as I listened is questions like these. If protests that only take place in social media are arguably impotent and they must inevitably come forth onto the street, then schematically, could we not also say that there has to be a place for violence, whether that is a violence of physical bodies attacking each other or a violence of occupation? In other words, it seems to be a counterintuitive injunction to say, at some point we must have violence. Similarly, if commentary is something that is paralyzing, it appears to be a counterintuitive injunction to say, at some point the commentary must stop. At some point, the discussion must stop. Infinite discussion is not good, and at some point decisions must be made. So in these cases, they're counterintuitive because following your argument that these attractive ideals have become mere attractions, we are looking for something unattractive. And I'm thinking we can talk about a new communist party, but perhaps for people that are not activists, people that are not engaged in specific political organizations, what would you say, following on from your argument, what would you say is something counterintuitive that they need to begin with in their approach to social media, in their approach to the network structure that surrounds them? So that would be my question.
Thanks. Okay, first, I just want to be clear. My point is that the system that we have is democratic, right? So we have democracy. This is what democracy looks like. The problem is that democracy is completely inadequate to emancipatory egalitarianism, okay? So that's the first thing. I don't want it to, I'm not giving a criticism of, oh, geez, it's not democratic enough. So that's the first part. On the vision for the future, I'd say communism, right? I mean, that's, and I think of communism as from each according to ability, to each according to need. The basics would include the abolition of private property, the collective ownership of the means of production, the collective determination of our collective conditions. So that would be and what's the rallying call for that? The rallying call is an emancipatory egalitarian future. Is there a place for violence? Well, I mean, I guess the way I would put it is, I can't think of a place where there's not violence. I mean, that violence, and what was that, something in Monty Python line, it's inherent in the system. It's a violence is, the violence is an unavoidable aspect of our conditions. So I don't know if that's something kind of distinctive to, or a repercussion particularly of what I'm saying. Did I address all the points you wanted, or was there something else?
Just very quick. I think just very quickly, the way I would ask the question specifically is, if we are saying that discussion is not always the best way to go, if we are saying non-violent social media organization is the best to go, then I think there will be many nods of agreement. But specifically, I'm sort of asking you to put your neck out, but specifically, what is the counterintuitive ideal that must then be pursued? Are we then saying discussion must stop? If so, when? When must the interminable process of informing stop? That would be the question.
Okay. There's something sort of odd about the question, right? Because the question makes it seem like everyone always discusses, even as the other part of your question that now they say, like, what do you say to people who aren't really political? Or what are they involved with, right? Well, clearly they're not, like, involved in discussions, right? Because by your own premise, they're sort of not involved. And what I would say there is, like, I don't have to worry about them. I mean, I'm talking to people who are politically involved, politically engaged. So I'm not really worried about, trying to speak to absolutely everyone in the world. That would seem like that's a kind of crazy fantasy of what it is to speak politically, I think. When one speaks politically, one speaks to some set of imagined others, some kind of population that you imagine politically engaged and listening, not people who you don't imagine as politically engaged and listening. So with the discussion must stop, what I would say, the way I think about that is, since at least Seattle, but let's go even before, but at least Seattle, people involved in left media discussions, everything has been indie media, right? It's like everything is participatory democracy, citizen journalism, indie media. That's the wave of the future. What does that mean? It's meant the denial of class conflict. It's meant a paving over of neoliberalism, as if our conditions were those of participatory involvement in this system. And what the repercussion has been justifying, legitimizing, protecting this system of neoliberalism and austerity. So with a shift in focus to better goals, right? Is our goal really participation? Or is our goal actually bringing down the governments that are redistributing wealth upward? Does that answer the question that you're looking for?
Thank you. I'm Sylvia Harvey, University of Leeds, United Kingdom. Thank you very much indeed for your talk. I think that it's good to point out, it's useful to point out, that there are organized attempts being made to move protest off the street and online. And I agree with what you say about the importance of physical, literal space. But the critique of social media as the sort of fog or bog into which social protest disappears runs the risk of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I would say that as well as noticing those on the street, let us also notice those who are supporting those on the street. And I'm thinking of the recent example of Turkey, where, as I understand it, people who perhaps were at work during the day or were frightened, when they got home at night and opened their doors and windows and banged the pots and pans, which, as I understand it, was an action in support of those on the street. So I think it's important to notice, always to have the habit of trying to notice what is happening and not what is not happening.
I think that's a beautiful comment, and I think the people banging the pots and pans, that's absolutely great. And we could also add to that the people who had clinics for protesters in different buildings nearby. We can add to it the people who would provide lemons and water for people to get rid of the tear gas in their eyes. So there's a huge realm of material support that you're absolutely right bears attention and acknowledgement.
Okay, yes, sir.
Thank you a lot for your speech. It was really very interesting. I come from France, so my accent must be quite bad. Sorry. From Paris. So my question was about your last words, which I liked a lot, about clicking is not enough. Let's say something like this. Of course, when you click, you like something, and the political value you may invest in such a gesture may be like exploited or captured as added value by the main industrial platforms today. But on the other hand, what you showed us very strongly was that each time we click, each time we do something, we have this reflexivity or desire process going on that lead us to get involved into what we do. So there's some relation between the psychological individual investment in digital media and some whole capitalist system exploiting things. And my question would be, couldn't we think about what Roland Barthes said in the 50s about the signs and the fact that words or any kind of meaning construction can be challenged, and so the question, what can we do, couldn't it get a good answer and just let's try to comment what commenting is, or describe what exactly clicking might involve. Thank you.
Can I ask Jodi just to hold with 3 other questions that I'd just like to take? If you could be very quick and just give your questions because we're running out of time. So.
Sure, thank you. So Stefania from Tilburg University, the Netherlands. Thank you so much for your enlightening keynote. I think we really need much more of these efforts to theorize. So build complex theories that allows us to understand complex dynamics. On the contrary, we academics are increasingly forced to produce, publish, deliver. So we actually engage more and more in isolated case studies that do not allow us to, produce knowledge that can maybe provoke social change, basically the understanding that is necessary to social change. So I would like you to ask whether, move away from the actual focus of your discussion, of your presentation, to connect all of this to academia and to neoliberalism in academia and how it affects our lives and society as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Peter Rocha from McEwan University, Edmonton, Canada, and I have a very short question. If clicking is not enough, then is hacking?
Good question. And finally, last question.
Wayne Hope, Auckland University of Technology. I just want to point briefly to one feature of communicative capitalism and ask for your comments. It seems to me one major feature is the obsession with real time, speed, immediacy, and now, such that people's sense of memory, people's sense of prospectivity actually is perhaps being damaged. So my question is, do you think this obsession with the real-time phenomenological world of communicative capitalism, to what extent is that pervading the social imaginary? And the second part of that question is, if it is pervading the social imaginary, is this undermining the possibility of collective memory, which is actually the primary precondition for collective action? Thank you.
Thanks everyone for the questions. With the last one, I think you're absolutely right, and I need to put in actually a fourth attribute of communicative capitalism that deals with speed up time, and I would even say futurity and predictiveness. The way that, particularly with big data, one of the goals for finding correlations is to try to predict, which makes it even harder to have collective memory. So I think you're absolutely right, and that's a kind of, basically that needs to be included in what I'm saying. I fully agree with that. On the point regarding hacking, I do, that one's hard, because I've got like the kind of romantic, oh, hackers are so awesome, sort of fantasy world going on. But the thing is that I've been trying to get over it because, I mean, for crying out loud, Capital itself lost like $10 trillion in the financial crisis of 2008. It didn't take a hacker. I mean, its own screw-ups did that. And so it started making me have less of a kind of thinking of hackers in such a kind of romantic Robin Hood sort of way. It's like, yeah, they can, shoot some arrows, and that's great, and hit some targets, but capitalism can do its own damage so much stronger. Though I still think that, for a good revolution, if you get 100 well-organized hackers, which is a little bit, an oxymoron, but if you could organize 100 hackers, that would be like a great force. On the academia question, yeah, right. I mean, the primary condition of academics under neoliberalism is forced to produce narrow deliverables, small-scale, easily digestible deliverables, quick ones, more and more of them so that none of us can ever have time to read them. And then more and more people are forced to do these on top of advanced teaching loads and all sorts of bureaucratic assessment kinds of work. So, I don't think I'm saying anything probably that the questioner didn't already imagine. I think that that academia is like one of the neoliberal front lines with these. I don't know if every place, if every English-speaking country uses the acronym MOOCs, right? The massive online. I mean, that's going to kill us all, right? I mean, that except for like 5 superstars at giant universities, but that's going to be the. We'll see what happened to us, what has happened to print journalism, and I think that people with secure tenured positions or full-time positions have got to ally with contingent adjunct faculty to stop that kind of position which is so exploitive, and to create a kind of common front against these massive online courses. On the BART question, I'm not 100% sure I understood it. What I would say is that I think that the conditions of the decline of symbolic efficiency make it the case that meditations on meaning end up inscribing us in these reflexive circuits, so that signification is less significant. Instead, there's the free-floating images that can mean anything, and that's, in fact, why they circulate so freely, because we don't have to worry about how they signify. Which another way to put it is also like the hipster identity is one that sort of flatly and fluidly moves into lots of places, and you don't really have to know whether or not it's ironic or serious or self-conscious or not.
That's extremely good. Can I just, before we finish up, just give a bit of housekeeping that's been given to me. The social gathering this evening will take place here in the Helix from 6:15, and buses back into town will start at 10 o'clock tonight. So it just gives me great pleasure to thank Jodi for a fantastic presentation or whatever. you clapped too soon, and for the respondents, Eugenia and Kevin. So thank you very much.